Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Henner. I'm here for VernonReporter.com, and joining me is Joan Osborne. Joan's latest album is Nobody Owns You. It was released in 2003 by Womanly Hips Records. And Joan is going to be in Viroqua on Friday, October 25th at the Historic Temple Theater. The show starts at 8 o'clock, and there are still tickets available. Welcome, Joan. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm going to start with the basics just to get folks acquainted with you.
Hmm.
And I'm going to try not to gush, as I said. I'm fangirling a little bit, and I think that's because you've kind of done everything with everyone. You've been nominated for 7 Grammys. You were one of the headliners at Lilith Fair. You toured with the Dead. You sang at the Nobel prize ceremony for Bob Dylan. You were featured in the documentary Standing in the Shadows of Motown. I have to take a breath. You sung for the Dalai Lama and with Luciano Pavarotti. Your breakout hit was in 1995 with One of Us, which got a lot of radio airplay, and it still does.
Hmm.
So that's my brief summary. I maybe left about a million things out.
It does sound very impressive when you smash it all together like that.
Right, exactly. So just tell us a little bit about how you got started in the
Mhm.
music business.
Yeah, well, it was kind of an accident. I mean, I had sung in choir as a little girl, um, and my choir teacher used to single me out to sing solos and things like that. But it wasn't ever anything I took seriously as a possible career. And in fact, I was in New York City. I moved there to go to NYU to study film, to study documentary filmmaking, and was living there and just happened to get invited by a guy who lived in my building to go out for a drink. And so we went to the very first place, which happened to be a blues bar, the first place on our corner. And this guy, for some reason, I still don't know why, he dared me to go up and sing with the piano player. The band was finished, but there was still a piano player who was there playing just, for himself and the couple dozen people who were still at this place. And so I did. And I sang a Billie Holiday song, God Bless the Child, and the piano player said, "Oh, that's nice. Why don't you come back? We have an open mic night here every Tuesday." So there was definitely something that I felt about singing that song, and at that moment in my life, and I think the fact that it was a blues song, it really reached into me and pulled something out, and so I started going to this open mic night once a week. And through that, I met a lot of other musicians, and I found out about other open mic nights, and I found out about this whole really vibrant music scene that was happening in New York City, downtown at that time, because I was at school, I hadn't really been paying much attention. So that was sort of my window onto this amazing music scene. And there were people on the scene who later went on to become very well known, bands like Blues Traveler, Spin Doctors, artists like Jeff Buckley, Chris Whitley, Dave Matthews was around for a while. So people like that were, kind of in and out and part of the scene too. So it was this very vibrant, incredible scene and an incredible training ground for me because I never studied music in school.
Ah, yes. So you were going to study film and be a documentary filmmaker.
That was the plan, yeah.
So you kind of always knew you were going to be an artist or a creative or at least a storyteller.
I think so. I mean, I think growing up in a small town in Kentucky like I did, to have some sort of grandiose ambition was not, I think you would have thought of yourself as being sort of delusional. The things that were open to girls were becoming a teacher, or maybe you could become a writer, maybe if you were really lucky. And I got involved in some theater productions and ended up directing a theater production when I was in my late teens, and that was very interesting to me. But I realized that most people in the U.S. don't go to see live theater, whereas pretty much everyone goes to see films and everyone has a TV in their house. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, maybe I should try to do it in an arena where, there's actually an audience. So that's what prompted me to move to New York.
Wow. I mean, that's a huge leap for somebody from a small town.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small town, definitely, and I was definitely, sheltered in a lot of ways. And it was a great place to grow up. But once I was done growing up, there really wasn't a lot to do, and I was pretty restless to find something or somewhere else to go. I had never been a person who dreamed of moving to New York City and becoming a star or anything like that, but it just happened to be where the school was that I wanted to go to. But once I got there, I definitely fell in love with the place, and it definitely, was quite an eye-opening experience.
So many decades later and 11 studio albums, I think. Here you are,
Oh,
and you did start your own record label, Womanly
mhm.
Hips. I'd like to hear a little bit about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, that was actually way back in the early 90s. I had been, I had started playing in New York City, through doing all those open mic nights. I met musicians and put together a band. And eventually, after a lot of trying and, being refused and being ignored, I started to get my own gigs at these clubs that people were playing. And eventually, was playing 5 or 6 nights a week in New York City. And then I had a friend who was managing me at the time, and he said, "Why don't you try to spread out and go to some other cities?" So I started playing in Philadelphia and DC and Boston and Rochester, New York, and uh, just wherever we could get to within a day's drive. And so whenever we would go to these places, people would be like, "Oh, I want to buy your album." Back then it was cassettes. "I want to buy your cassette." And I didn't have anything to sell them because I didn't have a record deal. So I thought, well, I better get on this. I better figure out what to do about this. And at the time, this was the early 90s, so there was there had been this very strong DIY movement within the punk scene and the hardcore scene, bands like Minor Threat out of DC, and there was this established sort of tradition among those kind of artists of putting out your own records. Those guys were not thinking that they were ever going to get a major label record deal, so they were doing it all DIY. So there was some information around about how to do this. And I looked at magazines and went to the library and looked at the bookstore and found some information and figured out just all the nuts and bolts and all the steps that it took to make that happen. And um, because I was far less familiar with the recording studio than I was with the stage at that point, with doing live shows. I thought, let's just record a live show, and that will be our first album. So we did. We recorded at a place called Delta 88 and put that out as our first album. And I needed a name for my record label. And one of the things that sort of drew me to blues music was this real appreciation in blues culture of curvy women, and that's my body type. And I sort of thought, well, I'm just going to claim this and own it and feel good about it. And so the name Womanly Hips sort of came up, and every time I told it to someone as a possible label, they were like, "That's a great name, that's a great name."
Well, and it recalls, Shake Your Hips, which I
Yeah,
think is a song that you've done. Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So you've had kind of two albums come out in the last 5 years. In 2000 was an album called Trouble and Strife.
Hmm.
And then your latest
That's
album,
20, I think that was 2020 was that record.
2020. Did I say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's my age is showing here.
That's
Right.
okay.
2020. And then Nobody Owns You in 2023.
Hmm.
So I've listened to both of these albums, and they're both just tremendous. And I think the if we look from Relish to today, there's a whole lifetime of evolution. You and I are about the same age, and so
Mm.
watching your music, and what attracted me along with your career is really fascinating. And as I said, you seem to have done everything. But I looked at how these two albums were labeled and reported on. So folks said that Trouble and Strife was a political album,
Hmm.
and much more of sort of a rock and roll vibe. And a certain streaming service calls it alternative music.
Hmm.
And then Nobody Owns You is being called Americana.
Hmm.
Um, can you talk a little bit? I mean, obviously, the world has changed completely since 2020.
Hmm.
But I'm really curious about sort of how you went from kind of a very outward focused um, type of album to what feels like a very inward focused album to me.
You mean between Trouble and Strife and Nobody Owns You? Yeah, that is actually um, very much what happened. I mean, I think I was taken aback, like so many people were, by the results of the 2016 election, and I felt very energized to try to, do what I could do, not only as a citizen by, going to demonstrations and lobbying my representatives and donating to organizations and all of that, but also to use whatever, small platform I had to, to try to talk about things in the political arena, but also, I had done a lot of I've done a lot of singing of Bob Dylan songs, and I think he's got an excellent way of writing songs that are political in nature, but they're not preachy, and they are coming things from a sort of sideways viewpoint where the song isn't going to be only talking about what's happening in this moment, and 10 years from now it won't be relevant anymore. The things that he writes can, because of the way he uses language, can be relevant in the moment that they were written, and can also be relevant 20 years later, and will probably be relevant 50 years from now. So I was really trying to capture that, and also to use the medium of, rock and roll and soul music, and to give it this very sort of positive energy, because I didn't the last thing I feel qualified to do is to lecture people. So I felt like combining those different threads would be a way to write political songs in a way that would, as you say, be outward focused, and also to be inclusive. I'm not looking to uh, add to the problem that we have right now of people being so alienated from each other, and of our society being so polarized. So I wanted it to be something that would welcome everybody in, and that was very much, what the task that I set for myself with that record. And the next album, Nobody Owns You, is very much a personal record, and it comes, on the heels of a lot of personal change in my life. I have a daughter who um, she was getting ready to leave home at the time that I was writing these songs. My mother she has dementia, and that is progressing and progressing as it does. I had just ended a 15-year romantic relationship. I had just turned 60. So, these are moments when you really stop and take stock of your life and think about, well, what is my purpose for being here, and what am I going to do with the rest of this limited time that I have on earth? And that was the mindset that I was in for writing the songs for Nobody Owns You.
Which I think we can tell. The title song feels so much like something that many of us would have written for our daughters
Mm,
as they were getting older. And so I have a lot of thoughts, but one of the things that I'm curious about, as I said, it sounds, the album sounds a lot like what I said was a look back. I had a writing teacher tell me once to find the ancestors of your story, because then when you get stuck, you can ask them for
mm,
help. And I was thinking about that in listening to this album, especially the song "So Many Airports,"
mm,
which is the a completely unwhiney song about an artist being on the road.
Mhm.
And so did you intend this to be, I guess you already answered that, a statement about this is where a woman of a certain level of experience sits?
I mean, I don't think I was looking to make a statement about, you know, women in general or my age in general. It was really just trying to make a statement about me and about my, the personal experiences that I've gone through. But, I know that things that I'm experiencing are things that other people have experienced too. And I feel like the only way you can get to the real heart of something artistically is to try to be as specific as you possibly can be, because the more specific you are, excuse me, the more specific you are, the more likely you are to hit on some kind of truth that is universal. So it was really just about, digging into my own experience, not holding back, not being afraid to, expose that to the world and, see what I could find. And, that's as much of a, I guess, a mission as I had. I don't think of my work in these sort of grandiose terms of like, I'm trying to make a statement about this or that. It's, you know, I, I try to picture, at most one or two listeners and try to think, what is this person, what am I trying to say to this person? And when I'm in the vocal booth trying to do a vocal, I try to think about there's one person listening and sing to that one person. Because if you can get that right, it will translate to a much larger audience, I think.
Do you do that when you're on stage as well?
Um, that's a little bit of a different thing. I think because you are standing in front of a room full of people, um, I think it's more about, this is something that I learned from working with Mavis Staples. It's more about allowing your energy to envelop everyone in the room and to include everyone in the room. And um, it becomes more of an event and, more of an embracing of all the people that are there as opposed to focusing on one person.
So tell me a little more about what that's like. So you mentioned Mavis Staples.
Mm.
I'm from Chicago, so one of my heroes.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
And she does that. She grabs the audience from the minute she walks on stage.
Mhm.
And then sort of a very different touring experience you had was when you were with the Dead. Um,
Mm.
so what makes the magic happen when you're on stage?
Well, I mean, music is a very magical thing. There's the physical reality of it, which is that you and the musicians are creating these sound waves, which are reaching across the empty space between you and the other people and are literally vibrating the skulls of the people who are listening to you. So it is an actual physical connection through the sound waves, and we have a physical response to that in our bodies. And so it's that. It's also the meaning of the lyrics and the poetry of the lyrics. And, for as often as I've sung different songs, even my own songs, they will have a different meaning to me from day to day, depending on what I'm going through, what I'm thinking about. Some line in a song that, hasn't really landed on me, before will suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. So you have to stay open to that experience, I think, because the audience is having the same one, and there might be a different line in a song that is really affecting, some people in the audience. So I think it's the meaning of the words, and the audience they have a job to do to complete the process of making the work of art, is what I believe. I believe that I can do everything that I can do, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone else but me until someone takes that into their own mind and their own heart and experiences it in the very particular way that they will experience it. And that's part of the magic too. You know, it's not finished until someone hears it and until someone allows it to mean something to them and makes meaning from it. So, you know, I guess that's as much as I can say about what the magic is, because it's definitely magic, and I've seen it happen again and again.
Have you ever had anything go horribly wrong? And and what do you do?
I mean, yeah, let's see, I was in Japan once and I had just done a very long, long flight. And I think we only had like 4 hours between getting off the plane and going on stage. And, you know, our first set was fine. And then I got up on stage to do the second set and just tried to sing and nothing would come out. And so they had to cancel the second half of the show and refund people their money. And I had to cancel the next several days to allow myself to recover. And, you know, it's also of, you know, as a singer, it all comes out of your body. So you have to take care of yourself. And sometimes even, you know, despite your best efforts, something will happen where you can't do your job. So that was pretty bad. Uh, I mean, there have been other things. I don't know that I necessarily want to go into them or
Yeah,
not.
sure. I feel like that was maybe.
I'll save that for the book, let's say.
Oh, okay. Is there going to be a book?
I hope so.
All right.
I'm working on it.
I can't move on without asking you to tell me a little more about when you were touring with the Dead. I've been a
Hmm.
Deadhead for longer than I care to remember. And you came in a couple of years after we lost Jerry,
Hmm.
and those were some difficult shoes to fill. And yet, when you were touring with them, a new bunch of new fans came on board.
Mm.
Um, so you had to learn a bajillion songs, and the shows went on forever. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, in the first place, I never thought that I was trying to fill Jerry Garcia's shoes because I don't think that's anything that you can do. I felt like my job was just to respect the material as much as I could and respect the tradition of the band as much as I could and be part of helping to bring that material to the audience and the songs, you know, they have so many incredible songs, and I had not been a Deadhead before I got the job with them, really. I knew, you know, a bunch of their stuff, but I had never, you know, I had seen them live maybe once, and, you know, I hadn't followed them or anything like that. But when I started to get ready to do these shows, and as you say, I had to learn hundreds of songs, um, I got this real appreciation for them just on the songwriting level of how beautiful these songs are. And so I thought, well, I can do this. I can inhabit these songs and be part of allowing them to live again for this incredible group of fans. Um, it was a lot of work. As you probably know, the shows go on for 4 hours. They are completely different from one night to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that's very smart of the band to do that. But if you're just coming in and you don't already know all that material, for me, it was like Grateful Dead boot camp. You know, uh, I tried to learn as much as I could in the weeks before the tour started, but I was also out opening for the Dixie Chicks at that time. So I didn't have the luxury of just sitting at home and working on the material. So I had to do a lot of it as we were going. So I would wake up in the morning and put my headphones on and learn the songs, and then we would go to sound check and I'd get the set list for the day and know what songs we were going to do that night, and then I would spend the rest of the time between sound check and the show trying to learn my parts and make sure I was ready to do this. And then, you know, we'd do the show and it would last for 4 hours. And then I would go on the tour bus and collapse and get up the next day and do it again. So it was a lot of very intense work, but also really enjoyable. You know, as I said, the fans they were great. And I had been nervous about, you know, are they going to accept me? Are they going to welcome me? Is this something that they're gonna say, "Oh, she shouldn't be up there," or whatever, but everybody, I think almost everyone was really appreciative. I know in some chat rooms, there was some grumbling that I was dancing around too much or something, but, you know, you can't please
Yes, as
everybody.
as will happen,
Yeah.
right? You know, and then the good news is, right, with that crowd, if you forget the words or you sing off key, everybody loves you
Yeah, they're
anyway.
used to that, yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about you brought up Bob Dylan, and I want to talk about Bob Dylan. It seems I did listen to some interviews, but and you mentioned that you hadn't really listened to Dylan when you were young, but kind of became familiar when you were in New York,
Mhm,
in the Village. And your first album, Relish, has what I would call a not particularly well-known Bob Dylan song, "Man in a Long Black Coat,"
mhm.
and then on the next album, Righteous Love. A phenomenal version of Make You Feel My Love. And then you did a whole album of Bob
Mhm.
Dylan songs. Tell us about your relationship to that music and to Bob Dylan.
Yeah, well, the Relish album, you know, I had been a huge fan of the Oh Mercy record, of Bob Dylan's, which came out in the 1980s. And, you know, I had, of course, known about him. And, you know, when you're on the scene in New York City, going to folk clubs, going to rock clubs, going to blues clubs, people are always covering Bob Dylan. You know, you're going to have a Bob Dylan song in somebody's set, you know, a lot of the time. So I started to know a bit more about him, because of that. And then because I was trying to become a better songwriter, I was digging into his work a little bit and trying to learn, um, just how to be a better writer myself from studying him. And yeah, and then the Oh Mercy record came out, and I was just floored by it. I thought it was amazing. And I can't really remember how the decision was made to put that particular song on the Relish album. It might have been just as simple as, you know, we were all sitting around and you know, I started singing that song, or we talked about the record, and you know that and then it sounded cool and we started working on it, and there you have it. It could have been just as easy as that. I don't remember a moment when there was some decision of, yes, we must have this on the album. Um, but I think because of that, I came to the attention of, you know, Bob Dylan and his management, and they asked me to sing a duet with him for a TV show. They were re-recording his song "Chimes of Freedom," and he invited me to come and sing with him. So that was the first time I ever met him, and I arrived in the studio in New York early, and I knew some of the guys in his band, so we were, you know, chatting, and my I remember my back was to the door of the studio, and I could feel the weather in the room change the minute he walked in, and it wasn't anything overt. It wasn't like people turned around and stared at him or anything like that. I didn't hear the door open, but I just felt this sense in the room of everyone's attention sort of springing to life, and then I turned around and there he was. And you know, it was an interesting moment. I thought, you know, what does this mean? You know, that everyone in a very subtle way, in a very not overt way, has, you know, put their attention on him. And we started working very quickly. And as many people have said, Dylan does not rehearse. He does not tell you what he's going to do. He does not practice anything with you or anything. He just starts, and you have to keep up with him. So I knew the song, but we hadn't worked on what my harmony part would be or anything like that. But he just got up on the mic and started, and we were sharing the same microphone. So my mouth was literally inches away from his mouth when we were doing this. And I had to be so laser focused on watching his lips move so that I could get his phrasing right, and just tried to do just a basic harmony that I figured would work with whatever he was doing. And we did the song once, and then we did it again a totally different way, totally different phrasing. And I had to just be laser focused and follow him and watch his lips move. And then we were done, and that was it. And it was over, and he was satisfied and he left. So I realized that the guys who work with him, they have to have that very, sensitive attention onto him because otherwise they're going to get left in the dust. He's not going to explain anything to you. You just have to be ready. So that was what I felt when he walked in the room, was that readiness, coming to the fore for the guys who work with him.
Is that exhilarating, that level of intense focus, or maybe exhausting?
I mean, it was definitely my adrenaline definitely was kicking in. So yeah, I would say it was exhilarating, and I actually ended up being sort of grateful for that because it allowed me no space to be nervous. And so I wasn't nervous. There was a job to do and I had to pay close attention and do it. And that was all that I was thinking about. Um, and in later years, when I was working with the Dead, I also got to sing with him on stage. And that was amazing. So yeah, I've had the great good fortune of working a couple of times with one of the great geniuses of, our lifetime. So it's pretty cool. Um, and as far as the album of Dylan songs goes, that came out of this desire that I have to do something that Ella Fitzgerald did. She did something called the Songbook series, where she picked a particular songwriter, whether it was Duke Ellington or Cole Porter, and would do an entire album of their songs. And she did, I think, 6 or 7 of these. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do something like that? And this Bob Dylan one was the first one that we did. We've gotten so busy doing other things that we haven't released volume 2 in that series yet, but it's still, in my mind, and it's still something that I'd like to do.
And whose music is top on that list?
We're thinking about Lou Reed for the next one.
Wow. Okay. I read somewhere that when you were working on Tangled Up in Blue for the Dylan cover album, that you were listening to Dusty in Memphis.
Mm,
So Dusty Springfield, one of the greats, and in fact,
yeah.
you did another cover album called Breakfast in Bed.
Hmm.
Uh, what was it about Dusty in Memphis that you related back to Bob Dylan songs, or was it just that one?
I think it was just that one. I think when you're doing a cover of someone else's song, your job is not necessarily to try to better someone else's version or to make the definitive version. And, you can't really do that with a Bob Dylan song. Um, it's more that you're trying to find the place where the song and your voice and your musicality can intersect to allow something to bloom about the song that hasn't yet occurred, and allow the song to live in a particular way that's unique to you. It's what jazz singers do all the time. And I don't remember exactly why, but I've always been a huge fan of the Dusty in Memphis record. And I guess I thought that there was a way to take that Dylan song and give it a little bit more of that sort of southern loping sensuality. And the song is talking about a love affair, even though it's more about the fallout from someone who can't forget someone in his past. And so I thought that would give it a certain sensuality and maybe even a female energy that other versions didn't have.
Yeah, also on that album is a very innovative version of Quinn the Eskimo.
Mm.
So listeners out there, you want to look that up for sure. Um, so what can we expect from the show at the Temple Theater?
Well, we do like to make it a combination of fan favorites, things that we know people, are looking to hear. Um, Songs from Relish, everybody always wants to hear something from that record. The Bob Dylan record is very popular. There was a blues record that we put out in 2012 that got nominated for a Grammy for Best Blues Album of the Year. So we tend to dig into that one. A lot of the stuff from the more recent records we will want to pull out because my thing is that I don't ever want to feel like I'm a nostalgia act, that people are just coming to see some 90s nostalgia thing. I'm That's not who I am, and that's not what I want to do. I'm always trying to bring something fresh and new, so we'll always play newer songs as well, and just try to make it into a one of a kind show. You can come see me many times. It's never going to be the same show twice, and you're always going to hear something new every time.
And then you do, I mean, you've done, the question I buried, earlier was about genre. I mean,
Mm.
you do R&B, you do soul, you do blues, you rock. They're now calling it roots, something called roots rock, something called Americana. I'm not sure what any of that stuff means.
I mean, that stuff is useful if you're trying to slot a record into a particular bin in a record store, but I don't think listeners really care about that. I mean, I never know what to call my music either, and I've been categorized as all different kinds of things, and I've played around in different genres and made a country record and made a blues record, and I think probably it was maybe not the most intelligent commercial move, but I've always just wanted to do the things that I've wanted to do.
Is it too much to hope for Stella Blue at that show?
That's a good question.
Okay. So
You'll
is there
have to
any,
come to the show to find out.
I listen, I bought my tickets the first day it was announced. So that would be exciting. So is there something you haven't done or somebody you haven't worked with that
Oh gosh. Yeah, of course, there's many people that I admire greatly that I haven't worked with. I love Jeff Tweedy's voice. I would love to do something with him. Bonnie Raitt and I are friendly, but we've never collaborated on anything. I would love to do that. You know, I, I've got plenty of ideas for records of my own that will stretch far beyond the time that I have to to do them in this world. So I'm just trying to, you know, do my own thing and enjoy it and have it be interesting to me and then hopefully interesting to other people too.
thumbs up to the collaboration with Bonnie Raitt. And she and Mavis are close, so she could hook you
I
up.
know. I mean, the three of us have sung together on stage, but we've never recorded
Okay.
anything together. So,
All right. What do you do when you're not making music and touring, or is that it?
well, now that I'm not don't have a daughter at home anymore, it is like all that energy that I was putting into raising my daughter, I'm now putting back into my work. And it's not just music. I've also started painting. I'm also working on a book, as I said. There's another project, possible project to do a documentary about the Holmes brothers that I'm,
Mm,
digging into a little bit. So I have a lot of irons in the fire.
great. So I'm going to end. Somebody asked me to ask you if there's a question you've never been asked in an interview that you want to answer.
Um,
Mm. What do people miss?
Gosh, I've been interviewed for 30 plus years. I don't know that people have missed anything. I think you guys do a pretty good job. You know, you do a pretty good job.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And just a reminder that Joan Osborne will be appearing at the Historic Temple Theater on Friday, October 25th at 8 o'clock here in Viroqua. Thanks, Joan.
You're very welcome. I'll see you there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.